Welcome to the Diaries of the Bearded IFA. Today's guest is David Roberts, business coach and business entrepreneur across North Wales. David, welcome to the podcast today. How are you?
I'm very well, Rob. Thank you very much for the invitation.
You're most welcome. For our viewers and our listeners, give us a quick bio. Who are you? Where have you come from?
Okay, so David Roberts, I've been in business, can you believe it, Rob, for 30 years?
Don't look old enough.
It's hard to think, isn't it? I started off life actually on the graduate scheme at Ford Motor Company many moons ago, and in the mid-90s, earned my spurs there and focused or specialised in the field of human resources and labour relations back in the day. So I had a 20-year career in that field, moving on from Ford to my first HR director role for a business called Harman International, who are in the audio electronics world. Spent a couple of years in California with Harman, and then came back to the UK in 2003 and spent 10 years as an executive director for a research and consultancy business called Wood Mackenzie based in Edinburgh. 2013 decided, largely for family reasons, which happy to go into later, to pack in the corporate life. Moved back home here to North Wales, and so spent the last 12 years or so building my portfolio career, and I spend a lot of time coaching and advising typically SME business owners. Have a couple of non-exec director roles, and as you well know, quite well plugged into other regional activity that goes on, such as the Regional Skills Partnership, the Economic Ambition Board, and so forth.
You're being a bit modest there.
That's very kind.
Because you also do the IOD North Wales.
I chair the IOD in North Wales, yes.
Yeah.
Chair the Regional Skills Partnership, which I've done for 7 years now. And as a function of that, was recently co-opted onto the Economic Wellbeing Committee for the region, and the Investment Zone Board, the Flintshire and Wrexham Investment Zone Board. So yeah, quite good at giving my time away. Yeah,
absolutely. But it's much received, and I know, speaking for the business community in North Wales, that your skills, expertise, and involvement, it's really appreciated and really supportive, because often businesses don't always have the right support from the right organisations at the right time. So, connecting people with the boards that you're involved in, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, that's well. Thank you very much for acknowledging that. I mean, the Regional Skills Partnership, as you know, I'm tremendously passionate about. I personally feel that in North Wales we're extremely well served in terms of the education and skills provision that we have, but often that can be a difficult landscape to navigate, particularly for SMEs who are very, very short on time, business owners that are very short on time. So given that I both understand SMEs as well as the skills system, yes, you're right, I hope that I bring a sort of a pragmatism and a sort of trying to declutter that landscape so that we can connect more business owners to the skills provision that we have here in North Wales, because there's plenty there for them to access, let's put it that way.
Yeah. I think going back, one thing I'd like to really touch on, because I'm really passionate about this. We've done it recently for our first apprentice. You mentioned there about graduate schemes. Yeah. How do you see apprenticeships and graduate schemes in the bigger piece of business and workplace?
Well, I mean, nowadays versus 30 years ago when I graduated, there's a lot more choice now. It was relatively commonplace for kids to be sort of pushed towards the university route. That still happens, and I'll come back to that point in a second. But apprenticeships, the sort of maturity of those has developed a lot over the intervening period of time. And of course, now we have what I'd call a bit of a hybrid. We have such things as degree apprenticeships, which is a pathway for younger people towards higher education, but coupling that up with work as they go. So I think there's much more choice available now. There's many more providers, lots more institutions. So there's no shortage of choice. But I think what comes with too much choice is, again, difficulty to navigate. In some ways, less choice is a simpler environment, isn't it, for people to understand. My personal view is there's something for everyone. You've heard me say this. There shouldn't be, certainly in the North Wales context, I don't believe there should be a young person in North Wales that doesn't feel hopeful about their future, whether that be in terms of being able to access further skills and education, and or ability to tap into a huge range of career opportunities that exist in North Wales and are coming down the lines. There's so much capital expenditures going on, generational career opportunities down the line. So I have a real passion around that. There should not be, well, it's been interesting, isn't it? In the news very recently, nationally, there's been a lot more talk about NEETs, not in education, employment or training, and then the growing number of young people between the ages of 16 and 25 that are becoming NEETs. We as a country, we should be hanging our head in shame on that. But here in North Wales, I do very much believe we should be going the opposite direction to the way the numbers are in the UK, because I think there is abundant opportunity for young people, and we've just got to get out there and communicate that to them and get them excited about it.
Yeah,
I could go on for 20 minutes just on that subject.
Yeah, and I'm completely on board with it. Lucy touched on it before when I interviewed her on the podcast about opportunities. Half the problem is not knowing they're there, so there is that communication piece. But let's look at something that I wanted to flag. So as you know, I run a not-for-profit networking. I try to do a lot of networking. I'm a big fan of it. Both the structured network and the informal network, and I think it's a really healthy thing in business. One thing that I always encounter when I do networking, and this isn't intended to be controversial anyway, but there's always a lot of business coaches. And you touched on there about sometimes there's too much choice. I feel like as a business owner looking for support, there's almost too much choice when you go to these networking groups. So as a business coach and as a business leader, both previously and current, how would you go about finding the right support for your business or for my business, for example?
Okay, so you've zoomed out there, because support is a broader term, isn't it? And of course a coach may not be the right solution to that. So I think as a business owner, and I'm one myself, I've worked with people like you and lots of people across the region over the last 12 years. It's a challenging world for a business owner. I mean, I think first thing I'd always say is I have the highest respect for anyone that has made the choice to set up their own business from scratch, or to buy one, or to take on the family business, whatever the route may have been, deserves highest level respect, right? Because it is hard graft, laden with risk, and
you have to give up part of your soul.
You have to, and so people will be drawn into running their own business for all sorts of reasons, right? And some of those may be like me, had a previous corporate life and fancied being my own boss. For others, it may be, well, I want to have more flexibility in terms of how I work, and sort of the theory is that if you're running your own business, you're a little bit more in control of your time and what you do, being your own boss and not being dictated to by others, and so on and so forth. So lots of reasons why people might be driven towards running their own business. Running a business is challenging. Notwithstanding the economic headwinds and macroeconomic challenges, it's just hard graft. So the type of support that an individual might need will vary from one person to another, and will vary along the journey of the business. The sort of support someone needs when they're initiating a business as a startup phase, working on their own probably, and figuring out what this thing called running a business is about, that would be very different support to someone that's now got a relatively mature business, they've got staff, they're looking to grow, develop, and so forth. That sort of support would look perhaps something very different. The other part of support that I think is important to acknowledge, which again is one of my personal calling cards, is that it's not just about the business, it's about the business owner. And I think all too often business owners might neglect the other things in their life that they really want to be finding time for, family, hobbies, health, and so forth. So the sort of support that person needs to, if you like, recalibrate their business alongside the other things that they want to be doing. Again,
that's a really good term.
Different support, right? It's different support. So, not duck answering your question. The first point is the business owner needs to try and figure out what sort of support it is that they need. Okay, there is plenty of support out there. You're absolutely right, and there's a lot of really good, high-quality coaches and mentors and advisors. I might come back to talking about the difference between those terms in a minute. I actually think there's no substitute for getting out and engaging with people and talking to them and finding out about what their background is, what their ideology, if you like, around coaching, mentoring is what they're passionate about. I think often it's a chemistry thing as well. At the end of the day, if a coach is going to be successful, they need their client to be comfy and to be able to open up and kind of share stuff that they might not necessarily be willing to share with anyone else. And so I think a lot of that is to do with the skill of the coach. But I think it's a human connection at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know, it's two people going to be spending probably a chunk of time together working on lots of things over time. So I think that chemistry is important. So in answer to your question, I don't think there actually is any substitute as a business owner. If you feel, you know what, I think I need some help with some stuff, right, then you need to get out and go and talk to some people and suss out what might work for you.
Yeah, because it could be, I suppose, if you break it down, actually I just need sales support.
Yep.
So then you might be looking for someone that is a real sales director type of background versus, as you said there, and I love the phrase of recalibrate, because you're right, you know, sometimes you run a business and you forget why you're running that business, and it's to maybe meet your personal objectives for your family and what you want to achieve for their goals as a family. But that's, again, another skill, having the right coach to say, what are you doing this for? How do we break it down? So I really like that, sort of making sure that you're going for what you're after rather than just a generic GP almost. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, you know, I have a real passion around that. I call it the personal vision, don't I? And I think that I routinely meet business owners, Rob, that have lost sight of why they set the business up in the first place. The business is consuming them. They're finding precious little time for the other things in life that they thought they would have more time for. I mean, it's actually an irony. And of course, you know, not necessarily finding time to look after themselves. So,
and I suppose touching on that, it could be a hard decision, couldn't it? It could be that decision you made many years ago to go, actually, I'm in a corporate environment. I've got less time with my family. I've actually got to do something different, which can be a frightening. A frightening prospect. Was it frightening for you when you made that decision, or?
No, not really. I mean, I knew I needed a change. We won't gone into too much detail about my corporate life, which I enjoyed every second of it. But I worked all hours for the businesses that I was involved in. So I have to a degree bought that T-shirt of other things in my life having been marginalised at that point, and I knew that something needed to change back in 2013. And I was just in the position to make that change and relocate and put all that sort of stuff first, take a year off and sort of re-energise and then come back at it. So I have bought that T-shirt to a degree, which is why I see, this is another good point about a coach. I think a coach, ideally is someone that has walked the path that the client is walking. And has come into coaching, whatever's brought them into coaching, with, in my case, 20 odd years of life and work and business before that, because I think you're leaning into that experience, both in terms of being able to empathise with the client, but also to provide some actual practical tips. Try this, I did that, don't do this, I didn't do that. So I think that's quite important.
I think the other important thing that you flagged as well is that chemistry. We often talk about that in the financial planning role, that, okay, sometimes you can take on a client because you feel that you should take on that client, but if there's not chemistry and it's two ways, it can make a real impact, because as you said there, they don't open up, they're not honest with you, and you can't deliver the best possible service if they're not really on board. And that's why, we always say to clients, go and see a number of financial advisors. And I suppose you're saying the same thing, go and see a number of business coaches and see who you click with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think for the business coach community, business coaches should be honest as well, right? And again, there's been a number of occasions over the years I've been practicing where, I've got talking to a business owner, we've jointly acknowledged they need some help, but I've said, I'm not sure it's me. I think that there's, not to say there's anything wrong with this, but I think you'd be better served by me introducing you to this person over here, because I think that their approach or style or methodology might better suit what it is you actually need and where you are right now. So, and I think in business, you're the same, Rob, I know this well, in business, that sort of honesty to say, well, look, easiest thing in the world, isn't it, to say, oh, I can help anyone. Well, can you really?
Yeah.
You know, I think the industry, one of the issues perhaps facing the coaching industry is not enough coaches being honest about where the lane within which they best operate.
And that's perhaps then a potential risk in terms of their credibility if you do take on clients that aren't the right fit.
Yeah. And I think it would also come back to this point about, well, what's the difference between a coach, a mentor, and an advisor? And again, I my personal view is, in terms of how I operate, I see myself as all three, and actually on a bit of a continuum from, you know, the purist coach, which is really about trying to help the individual unlock answers to their own questions and issues. You know, the mentor who is imparting their past experience and knowledge, and the straight-up advisory, almost the consultative piece. And a lot of my clients, you know, wouldn't necessarily thank me for sitting on a piece of advice that, you know, they're pretty confident I know the answer to their question, just tell me, David. So I think that, you know, again, coaches need to think about where they operate. Am I the purist coach? Nothing wrong with that. Or actually is my offering something that might stretch across mentoring and advisory as well? And I think that, you know, the skill is figuring out, you know, which David does my client need right now, right? Is it the coach that's going to help them answer their own questions and kind of surface their own solutions to things? Or is it the, you know what, I've just got to help them out of this bind and give them some hard-won advice, and which they can take or leave, right?
Yeah.
But so again, I think if someone's looking for a coach in its broadest terms, have a think about what is it I'm looking for? Is it a coach? Is it a mentor? Is it an advisor? Is it all three rolled into one?
Yeah.
Right. In which case, that will be a lens through which to interact with people out there.
I think that's really useful to actually have that breakdown of the three roles within that space. So thank you for that. We've got a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
Now, I've got a question that I was keeping because I wanted to be a bit of a curveball. So, we know each other well, so I know I can get away with this. You're back in North Wales, which is obviously the centre of the universe.
Obviously.
And you got a background here with family in Wales. How do you then still balance being an England rugby fan?
Well, you know, the Welsh team is my second team, right?
I know, but it's still second.
Look, family. You know, Rob, that family roots are entirely in Wales, and of course, I was the black sheep, or perhaps in this context, white sheep, that was brought up in the southeast of England. So I couldn't possibly be anything other than an England supporter, could I? However, you know full well that the Wales-England fixture is always a challenging one.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're sat alongside me.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, we won't go there because the last few years, it's not been a great time as a Wales fan. But the tide has changed. The tide
is changing. It might take a few more years yet, Rob.
You just lucky it's rugby and that we can still sit next to each other in a stadium.
Indeed.
Yeah, it could be football. And,
we have got the World Cup at the moment. So I've noticed with pleasure on the games that the few games that I've watched a little bit of over television, that the crowds seem to be nicely mixed in together, which is great.
Excellent. Last 60 seconds or so. What single piece of advice would you give to, let's focus on newer businesses, younger businesses. What single piece of advice would you give them at the moment, do you think?
At the moment, I would say, well, actually there's sort of three elements to this, which again, you know, because I talked about it recently. You need to figure out ways to hold on to your belief, okay, as to why you're doing what you're doing, why did you set up the business in the first place, and have real clarity on that, right, without being too sort of businessy speak. You know, what's your mission? Have real belief in it or maintain it. Have a great plan, okay, I think, and a plan that's adaptive. So sometimes people misconstrue a plan as something that's then cast in stone, never to be changed. But I see too many businesses that don't get into the routine of revisiting their plan of attack, whether it's for the year ahead or the next 2 or 3 years. So be conscious of that. And thirdly, execution. Right, it's all about execution at the end of the day. And I think that all business owners would be wise to always be thinking about, what are my priorities? What do I really need to get done? You know, in amongst all the hailstorm of you know, macroeconomic stuff and political nonsense and so forth, what is it I need to be really focused on executing? Try to minimise distractions and keep cracking on.
Amazing. Thank you, David. Fantastic guest on today's podcast. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, and details about David will be in the description. So thank you for tuning in.